For this session begins with Jermain Jackman, who is a singer and activist, 2014 winner of The Voice and a lead on the Baobab Foundation. And then that's going to be followed with by Juliana Ojinnaka, who's the UCU regional chair and also UCU Black Members Committee chair. That's followed by Mckenzie, who's a Liberation General Secretary, and Louise Regan, the NEU National Officer, and finally, Anna Rothery, the former Lord Mayor of Liverpool. And they all have 5 minutes each to make their presentation. So, Jermain, if you could kick us off, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Can everyone hear me? Can everyone see me clearly? Wonderful, wonderful. It's great to be here, seeing so many friends in one space discussing such an important topic. So I don't have long, so I'm going to get right into it. And you're going to hear over the course of the next hour a lot of perspectives about what does that process of decolonization look like? What does reparations look like in the 21st century? And how do we ensure that we can create a more equitable society? And I'm going to quickly talk about a story. It was maybe a year and a half ago, I asked myself, during the pandemic, I asked myself, well, how do we decolonize wealth? And I think the perspective that I'm going to speak from is the charity and voluntary sector, and decolonizing wealth in that aspect, because what we saw during the pandemic was a disproportionate impact on Black and Brown-led organizations. They were hit the hardest in terms of resources, in terms of funding. And this is already compounded upon the fact that Black and Brown-led organizations don't get funds in the first place. And then we had the death of George Floyd, the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor in America, and everyone started discussing racism as though it was this new concept to them. You had companies and corporations exploiting people of color around the world, but saying that we're committed to anti-racism, wanting to fund organizations, Black and Brown-led organizations. If you saw the pledges come out from Coca-Cola, even though they were extracting palm oil from indigenous communities around the world. And then what did we see then? 50% of that actually never happened. And the other 50% was just short-term funds given to these grassroots organizations. And then come this year, March, they're exactly back where they started before the pandemic. So how do we decolonize wealth? And Stephen rightly said, there was an anger and frustration that I had and a desire for change. And that's why I helped create the Baobab Foundation, which is going to be a fund, and we're launching a £5 to £10 million fund next year. But what does this actually mean? This is a grassroots-led funding organization. It's not like the National Lottery. It's not like Comic Relief. This is actually grassroots organizations, Black and Brown-led organizations around the country coming together because they know where the money needs to go. They know the needs of the communities that they work with. They know what services need to be provided to some of the most marginalized of communities. It's going to Black and Brown-led organizations around the country. And I urge you guys, just check out Baobab Foundation. And we're also hosting an event at the end of this month called Wealth Redistribution. How do we advance racial justice with wealth redistribution? Because we understand that money throughout history has been used to divide and control people. And we are rewriting that. We are saying, no, the money needs to be with Black and Brown-led organizations. They need to decide and they need to have the power. Because when we talk about decolonization, it's also about how do we redistribute power? How do we put power in the hands and the decision-making power in the hands of grassroots organizations, those Black and Brown-led organizations? So this is a real practical way that we can decolonize wealth, a real practical way of wealth redistribution, and a real practical way of putting power in the hands of the grassroots organizations so they can effectively meet the needs of the communities and the people that they work with. I'm really excited about the future and what the future may hold in terms of the Baobab Foundation when we launch our fund. But ultimately, it's part of that conversation on how do we create a more equitable society? How do we ensure that that those communities, global majority communities, because I don't say ethnic minorities anymore, the global majority communities around the country can benefit from what was historically an unequal funding system. And if we even think about some of the Black and Brown-led organizations in Scotland, who don't even get a second look. So it's really about redistributing power, redistributing wealth, and putting power into the hands of the grassroots. I can see the sign of 1 minute, 30 seconds. So I'll end there, but please do engage with what's being discussed today. I'm really excited to be on this panel, and I'll be speaking at a number of other panels throughout this afternoon. And it's great to see so many friends and comrades. Soraya, I see you in the conversation as well. So thank you so much. Stephen, you're on mute. I might have to be the host.
Thank you very much. It's very exciting to hear about that grassroots campaign, which is trying to sort out the injustices, which are a legacy of imperialism, and how Black and Brown people can take the decisions back into their own hands. That's fantastic. What I'm going to do now is introduce the second speaker, Juliana Ojinnaka. If you could start speaking now. Thank you.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Juliana Ojinnaka. I'm a chair to the Black Member Standing Committee. I'm also regional chair for our union. Thank you for having me on the call, and solidarity to the organizers of this conference and to previous speakers yesterday. It was really exciting time discussing all these issues that affect our communities, and also solidarity to those who are going to speak after me. Okay, so my remit is really to look at decolonization, but I'm really focusing on education. So the question then is, what is decolonization, and why are we decolonizing? What are we decolonizing? Decolonization is an attempt to remove all the leftovers of colonial rule that is inherent in all the major institutions in most Western European countries, Britain being one of them. Decolonization is important because all of the institutions in Britain, including the media, theatre, the economy, the social services, health, medicine, even the agenda for climate change, the police force, are all immersed in this process of decolonizing and the decolonization agenda. This is because it has implications for power, and who holds power and in whose interest. But before we talk about decolonizing, let's just talk a bit about colonization. Colonization is that period of time when Europeans went over to different parts of the world, including Africa, Asia, the Americas, China, you name it, and capitalized and took up the land, the labor, the resources of the people, their means of production. And out of this came negative ideas about those people who have been colonized by those who are colonizing them as a way of justifying their actions in these countries. So Britain was a big player in this process, and therefore the role that Britain played in slavery and colonialism was huge. Britain's colonial past reflected all its institutions in the economy, the social and the political structure. And this has been used to exploit the oppressed people, who are seen as powerless, and because of their nation, because of their race, because of their class, and because of their gender or immigration status, or even the ableism. The idea of decolonization is not a new event. Scholars and Black parents and students have been pushing for this for a long time. However, the death of Floyd George and the COVID-19 and Black Lives Matter movement renewed this vigor to dismantle these structures that has from time kept most people oppressed and suppressed in their institution and in their countries and so on. So we need to ensure through decolonization that the needs of groups who have suffered structural inequality are responded to in the education institutions or at all levels. So we need to decolonize our institutions to reflect the interests of all people, appreciate the cultures within the institutions and curriculum that we work in and teach and study in, so that the needs of all groups are met. So we need to decolonize our mind, we need to decolonize the way we teach. We need to read our institutions and our learning, the historical misconceptions that we've had, our ignorance, our racism. We need to get rid of the narrative that says that these people did not have a history until the Europeans came into their shores. We need to get rid of the languages that denigrate all of these people, and in the process promoting European languages. So we need to, all of this decolonization program needs funding. It means new staff. It means looking at promotion. It means representing those who have been underrepresented in the staffing profile. It means changing your learning resources, looking at your LRC and looking at what you provide there. It has implications for visitors who come to do work in your institution. It has implications for students as well who travel all over the place and so on. We need to remove all the cultural barriers that make it difficult for students to study and so forth. And one of the things that we're asking is that institutions, just as Jermain mentioned before, all the institutions that had suggested that they were going to give some help to the Black community and so on, that they actually bring this before and revisit what they're doing. We're asking our institutions as well, where we work in the education sector, we're asking everyone to begin to decolonize their curriculum, to work with our unions are working with our institutions to modify their policies in relation to recruitment and selection and so on. We need to get our employment institutions to carry out impact assessment as to affect Black workers and so on, and adopt more equality and diversity policies that would enable us to have a more diverse workforce. Even though there is a diverse workforce, the structure as it exists does not reflect that. We need to revisit and introduce
could you
policies.
You start wrapping up, please?
Okay, and microaggression and so on that exists there. And so it means that we need to ensure that we pay something back to our communities in terms of reparation. And I'm quite prepared to take some questions after the session to cover all the other areas I've missed out. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That was excellent. The decolonization process is very profound, enormous implications that you have set out, and there's much food for thought there in terms of the all the resourcing that's required and the impact on staffing, etc. Okay, we're now going to move on after that to Roger Mckenzie, who is the Liberation General Secretary. I just want to say that this meeting is being recorded. The presentation of the speakers is being recorded, but not the contributions in the discussion that will be recorded. Just thought I'd make that clear. Okay, you can start.
Okay, thanks, Stephen. Solidarity to everyone. And I want to start my contribution by paying respects to those people, those organisations that have been campaigning for reparations for years, and in particular, none more so than the Global African Congress. And I know some of their comrades are on this call as well today, and they've played a magnificent role in making sure that the fight for reparations has continued for a long, long time. The fact that it's continued for a long, long time brings me to the conclusion that we need to do more. And we need to do something that's going to bring this thing to head. Now, as far as I'm concerned, we need to bring this whole campaign for reparations on the same level as we did the anti-apartheid campaign. We need to make sure that this is a real movement that brings together all of those people who are serious about reparations, serious about building a movement for reparations, and are serious about working in unity together. Now, I say serious, and I kept saying serious for a reason, because I think we have moved way beyond unions and other organisations simply passing motions and thinking that's enough. It is not enough. Clearly, it's not enough. We need to do something that's going to make sure that we really bring some teeth to this campaign. Now, I know that there's a lot happening at a kind of global level, mainly through through Barbados and so on. And there's been some real good progress through some of those organisations, through some of those official organisations. But I want to say that those are important, but more important is the grassroots movement that we build to bring about reparations. That's got to be the key to real change. Now, I think that as part of that, we need to be bringing together all the organisations that really are serious about reparations to deal with the organisational requirements that we need to have, but also to deal with some of the issues that arise when you start debating these issues across our movement. For example, people say, but you can't just, this isn't just about money. Well, no, it's not just about money, but I tell you what, it is about money, and people need to understand that this isn't new. There has been a decision taken not to give money, not to give monetary reparations to people of African descent for what we experienced during slavery, during enslavement. That has happened because there are other examples of where governments, namely one example I can think of is the US government giving reparations to the Japanese for the treatment of Japanese who were enslaved in the United States during the Second World War. So they can do it if they choose to do it. What we need to do is to make sure that the same level of importance is applied to people of African descent, because what we know is that anything that they can do to say we have sympathy for the racism, the anti-black racism that people of African descent experience, we have sympathy for it, and they come up with all sorts of excuses about why it's difficult to actually do something. Well, we have to put them in a position where they understand we're not prepared to wait any longer. What we've seen over the last year is excuse after excuse, even after people started from the position of, yeah, Black Lives Matter, and we need to turn this moment into a movement.
1 minute left.
I can see that. Thanks. Yeah, I got it. So we need to do all of that. We need to turn this moment into a movement. And then they did nothing. And I think that has to end. We cannot be treated like that. And the only way we can ensure that we're not treated like that is by building a movement that's big enough and strong enough to take forward this campaign for reparations. Thank you, comrades. Solidarity to you all.
Fantastic. Thanks very much. A very passionate call to arms is something that's extremely important, and increasingly so, I think, as it's been debated and discussed in wider circles than ever before, and I thought that was fantastic. So we know that there's this grassroots movement that is building, and hopefully this time it'll take a more serious dimension. Okay, the next speaker I'm going to call now is Louise Regan, NEU National Officer.
Hi, thank you so much, Stephen. And I bring apologies from Daniel Kabedi, who's our national president, who was supposed to be doing this, but I'm filling in at fairly short notice. So, so apologies from Daniel. He has a family event that he couldn't miss. It's really great to be here and to follow on from such fantastic contributors. Just so people are aware, I'm a National Officer for Membership and Equality. I chair our Equalities Committee, and I am an education worker, so I've been teaching in primary schools for over 30 years and have many years of experience actually of teaching an anti-racist education to young people, but I know that there is much more that we can do. I'm just going to talk a little bit about the work that our union has done around decolonizing education, because I think it's absolutely essential that our children and young people have a decolonized education system. I mean, last year we saw a number of events which really highlighted racism, and you know, I completely agree with previous speakers. You know, these aren't new events. The murder of George Floyd was horrific, but there are many Black people who die at the hands of the police and racists. But last year, I think, highlighted for many people that that racism that is endemic within our society. And we saw huge demonstrations globally around George Floyd's death. And then we saw the bringing down of the Edward Colston statue in Bristol, which was a very interesting moment. I think most people prior to that event would have had no idea who he was or the role that our country played in the slave trade. And I think it has sort of highlighted that and made people really think about it. My union, the National Education Union, actually held a Decolonising education conference back in 2019. And there was a real focus on bringing decolonising into the primary and secondary education system rather than higher and further education, where it had sort of been based really. For people that on the call that aren't educators and may not be aware, Black writers are less than 5% of many GCSE and A-level reading lists. Black Caribbean, multiple heritage and Gypsy Roma traveller pupils are excluded at nearly 3 times the rate of white pupils. And we know that Black pupils are more likely to be targeted by uniform and appearance policies. And there are less than 10% of Black teachers in the UK, less than 10% of the teaching population are Black. We did a report with the Runnymede Trust, which also talked about the impact of racism on those teachers, the fact that they didn't get career progression, they were less likely to get into leadership roles. And again, Black children therefore are not seeing people in those roles. And as one Black educator said to me, you cannot be what you cannot see. Black children are growing up in an education system that does not reflect their histories, achievements and cultures. We have really contributed to developing work in this area. We've developed an anti-racism framework and we need to really ensure that this is embedded in all of our schools. We've produced monthly podcasts for members to use. We do produce Black History Month resources, but I'm very committed to the view that, you know, Black History Month is not something that should just be done as an isolated once a year we can tick off we've covered anti-racism in our school. Anti-racist education has to be embedded throughout our curriculum. It has to be a core that runs through everything that we do. And we've also challenged the government. We challenged them during lockdown. We challenged them around the lack of support for Black workers, not only in education, but across the working population and the disproportionate impact of COVID on them. We're calling for a review of the curriculum to ensure that it is honest about what our government has done historically. It is honest about the role that we have played and that we educate our children and young people about our impact globally, and that they understand and see themselves reflected in it. And we're also asked them to review initial teacher training. I said I've been educating for over 30 years. When I trained as a teacher, I was taught an anti-racist education system, how to deliver anti-racist education in our settings. Teachers now get no training around how to teach about a decolonising or anti-racist education system, and that's really important. And finally, we've asked that they learn from the Windrush Review and develop a plan to teach about the history of the UK, including its colonial history and the history of migration. I think all of these things are really important. I agree with Roger. We are past the time where we just pass motions at our union conferences and don't act. We have to act as educators. We have a duty to educate our children, our young people, but also our communities about the reality of the world we live in. And we have to really push back and develop a truly anti-racist, decolonised education system. Thank you.
Thanks very much. A very clear survey of what's going on, what NU's presented, particularly around the issue of the proposals and pointing out the need to act and the need for which other speakers have echoed, a grassroots movement and the profound structural racism which exists in education first. Great, thank you.
House, increasing the numbers of landed gentry, which in some cases like Richard Drax still extends to land in the Caribbean. And as Sasha pointed out, a plethora of statues to slavers, hashtag Jeffrey must fall, we have one of those in Hackney, as well as being responsible for quite a few of the sparkly gems safely locked up in royal jewelry boxes. Alongside this, they helped shape financial systems which in their enactment continue to perpetuate colonialism in African, Caribbean, Asian and Arab nations. Without a doubt, there must be restorative justice for the nations carved up and plundered. And yes, we must seek justice for the millions of people of African heritage whose forebears suffered unimaginable cruelty as a result of the transatlantic slave trade. amid a narrative which suggests that the financial inequality between colonizing nations and those colonized or created as a result of the slave trade is simply down to self-determination, there's a need to recognize that where we are today is as a direct result of the way in which countries in the West have organized the world fiscally over hundreds of years. Within this context, there are some who would deign to suggest that the foreign aid some countries receive is a form of charity, which will be sufficient to keep them quiet. And I firmly hold the position espoused by Frantz Fanon in that colonialism and imperialism have not settled their debts. The riches the rich are choking on in the West are those it plundered. Foreign aid can never be considered charitable, rather a minuscule form of restitution that by no means makes up for the damages the West has caused. The damage is extensive. Take the British seizure of India, where they destroyed traditional farming practices, making way for crops for export to Europe, resulting in the death of 29 million, or King Leopold of Belgium's lust for ivory and rubber, which resulted in the deaths of 10 million Congolese. This full-scale genocide was replicated by the Germans in Namibia, and who of course can forget Cecil Rhodes, responsible for the death of millions as a result of his brutal desire for land and diamonds. This all sits beside the millions of Africans who lost their lives as a result of the slave trade. That being said, although vital components, reparations and decolonization is not just about reshaping education systems, reframing history or making restitution, it should also be about reshaping the global economy. From disproportionate poverty, land grabs, the continuing extraction of resources through to unfair fair deals, all around us, we remain subject to economic imperialism. It's a system which ravaged lands and continues to limit life opportunities and indeed life itself. While we work to decolonize minds, there must also be a shift in the scales of economic balance. As things stand, the arbiters of financial approaches and free market fundamentalisms, the IMF and World Bank, are key to perpetuating a hegemony that has racial demarcations. This is evidenced in countries such as Tanzania, a former German colony, where its debt to the World Bank stands at 6.8 billion. When negotiating debt relief, one of the conditions was the privatization of Dar es Salaam's water system. This saw the European consortium that won the contract limit water access to some of the world's poorest people. This simply would not be permissible in a country in the Western Hemisphere. Going forward, achieving racial justice requires that people and nations across the world who continue to live with the legacy of the slave trade and colonialism are able to undertake meaningful self-determination without being subject to the colonial control of institutes such as the IMF and World Bank. I support the calls for full reparations and for those among us who bear the scars, thank you, and agree with Roger that those working on this need to come together to this end. It's incumbent upon those responsible to break the historical continuum of their actions as a means of bringing about a world where there is agency and equality for all. Acts of contrition must break the cycle of subjugation with there being long-lasting outcomes. Greed undoubtedly poisons men's souls. It's been a precursor to many injustices, too many immoral acts, and too much cruelty. The time for guilty parties to do what's right is right now.
Wrapping up now.
Thank you, finished.
Fantastic, great, great detailed account of the far-reaching effects of colonialism and imperialism on Africa and beyond. Thank you very much for that contribution. I'm now going to call Anna Rothery to speak, and she'll be speaking for 5 minutes. Then after that, Lynn will make a contribution. And if people want to make a contribution, just raise their virtual hand and you'll be able to speak for about 2 minutes. Thank you. Thank you, Anna.
Hello, everybody. Sorry, I'm not going to be doing anything formal because as you can see, I'm stuck in my car, going from event to event in the city. But what I do want to speak about is in terms of reparations. I mean, we know through the existing structures within city councils, local authorities, and national government, I mean, they are all stacked against Black communities and economic equality. I've been championing economic equality for 16 years as an elected member, but 25 years in total as a member of community politics, etc. And the one thing that I cannot ignore is that the consistent rolling out structures that stop our communities accessing even some of the basic funds. So funds that come into play in terms of community development, community regeneration, community wealth building, community businesses, social enterprises, CICs, you will always see time and time again, our communities are not able to access these funds. And if we do, we have to jump through hoops in order to do so. I'm just working with an initiative on Lodge Lane, just around the corner from where I am in Liverpool 8. And it's the biggest investment in small Black business that the city has ever really seen. And it consists of 14 units. And the opportunity is for fledgling Black business to have a space to function and sell from. And on the day before the launch of that initiative, the City Council pulled the license on it. Now, the people that we're talking about from our community don't have the financial wherewithal. We know we're not able to access mainstream finance, etc. And so that's 10 times more harder for a Black business to set up and get running. So the money that was invested in these businesses that went front load for the day when they were doing the official launch, because they knew the footfall would be big enough to warrant the investment, and they were left hanging. The only reason why this is still open and functioning is because the investor understands the community and the Black community. They're not just an investor that wants to make a quick buck, they're here for the long term. They want to invest in the community and help and assist our community businesses and private business to grow from the Black community. But the reality is that any other investor would have still charged those rents, and those businesses would have gone to the wall. This investor, however, I'm proud to say, has not taken any rent off the businesses for the last 2 months while they've been still trying to get the license on the land. Now, you might say that this was done and orchestrated in a particular way. It certainly wasn't done to support Black business and local economy and to invest in our community and generate an income in a much needed area. And so when we look at reparation, I think we need to look at reparations in terms of the internal structures that already exist that can support Black communities and the additional structures that we want to implement to give that additional support. But don't let people off with what's already available, because all of these initiatives and all of these funds are set up to support local communities. If we were to monitor and to do an evaluation on just how many Black organisations, Black individuals, Black businesses were actually able to tap in to available funds, and we'd be absolutely horrified. And I know we've looked at Black finance, Black business from mainstream banks, which is absolutely appalling. So, how do we change this going forward? Well, one of the other reasons I came into politics was the lack of Black representation. And without a political driver to change, then we're pretty much, it's not going to happen. And so we need to make sure that we've got more Black representation that's arguing against, not just the cuts in communities, but how they inadvertently affect the Black community. It's compounded.
Oops. Looks like, okay, there's obviously a problem with the connection there. Whilst we're waiting for her to return, if we can go to Sarah to make your contribution. Thank you, Soraya.
Thank you. And again, I'd just like to thank you for allowing me to be part of today's session. I've just heard some wonderful I take away a lot from what the speakers have said. Underline that, as Roger pointed out from the very beginning, there is a need for a coalition of organisations involved in seeking reparations for people involved, people affected by the transatlantic slave trade, and also the impact of colonialism. It's clear that we have a government who has no interest in addressing these issues. Sorry, I've got a daughter here. And so clearly, the time for accepting the status quo has long passed. We have to be forceful in our demand for these rights to be addressed, or these needs to be addressed, and for justice to be part and parcel of this process. Sorry.
I can't, if you can unmute yourself. You can't. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next speaker, I know it'll be Anna to do the summing up. So I think Soraya has had to finish. Anna, are you there? Thank you, Anna.
Hello?
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you hear me now? I mean,
Yes.
the one thing that, you know, is obvious from the conversation today is that, you know, Liverpool some 8 years ago had Children Black History Month at the International Slavery Museum. We had speakers from all over the country and speakers from other countries talking about reparations. And so what happens is it becomes exhausting. And, you know, we end up losing people because, you know, banging on the door asking for reparation is like continuously ignored by governments and local authorities. And so you end up with, you know, people becoming completely worn down with challenging. And so we do need to be more strategic in the approach. We've got some amazing speakers. We've got, you know, people dealing with Windrush, and rightly so, as one of the previous speakers said, you know, Windrush, you know, this gives you an example of, you know, reparation and where it's actually being denied to people who should be able to access when you look at the settlements that are being offered in terms of people losing their homes, jobs, etc., and being displaced once again. But, you know, I think we do need to be strategic. We do need to make sure that we drive it home on the agenda. I had another speaker talking about the representation of Black councillors, Black MPs in politics. We need to be utilising those councillors and MPs. They should be driving that message home. It shouldn't just be up to communities to keep having the conversation over and over again. Yes, we need a proper strategy in place. We need a proper strategy in place, because what happens is people just become, you know, burnt out, having the conversation over and over again. So we need to make sure that we take it, move it forward, and we have a reporting structure in place to see in terms of how much ground we've gained on that.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Anna. If we could go to Louise, please.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. I'll try and be swift, but it's been a really informative session. So thank you so much for inviting me along. And I've just as Soraya's just said, actually, I've learned lots from the speakers and from the chat as well. So it's great to hear other people's contributions. I think, you know, from my point of view, what we do in schools and colleges is really important. And I often say to people, you know, we have to remember, no child is born a racist. Racism is taught, and we have a huge role to play as educators in challenging racism and making sure that we are fighting back against racism that is taught not only in homes, but actually by a government. We have an extremely racist government at the moment. Sarah's absolutely right. Pimlico School was a really good example of children and young people and their teachers fighting back. But I know James has also posted about the situation in Chesterfield, where they had a really good challenge to a school there in a really positive way. So I think we have to celebrate those wins, but recognise that there is much, much more that we need to be doing. And one of the most important things that we need to do is to reclaim our school curriculum and make sure we are teaching the things that our children and young people need to learn about, and teaching it in an effective way. I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Louise. If we can go on to Roger. Roger, if you'd like to make your summing up remarks.
Yeah, I will when they let me unmute. So I'm off now. I think we have to work really hard to make sure that this isn't the latest fashion. I very deliberately said earlier on that there's been people working on this for some considerable time, and we have to learn from them and we have to work with them. This isn't a new campaign, and I'm not suggesting we have a new campaign. I'm suggesting we have a united campaign, one that's actually designed to make a difference, because I'm fed up with people jumping into the latest fashion like they did over the last year. Black Lives Matter, let's turn a movement into let's turn this moment into a movement. Let you know, it's the latest thing, right? And they've all moved on. But we can't move on as Black people because this is important to us. This is our lives. This isn't the latest thing for us. So let's come together. Let's make sure that we build the movement that's going to make a difference in this campaign for reparations, because they ain't going to turn around and do the right thing without pressure being applied collectively by us. Solidarity to you all. And I hope we get this meeting off the ground where we can all come together and make that difference, because I don't want to be continually looking over my shoulder, waiting for people to come along to the latest campaign that somebody decides is important. For us as Black people, for us as people of African descent,
30 seconds.
There's few more important things. There you go, 25 seconds.
Fantastic, very good timing. And finally, Juliana.
Yes, thank you very much, everyone. I've really learned a lot from this session, and part of the way we do reparation is through education. And I've taught mature students and A-level students, and one of the things that comes across time and time again, I teach Black history as well as which I created myself, is that students at the end of the course will tell you that they have no clue about what's gone on before. The curriculum does not adequately reflect anything. And therefore, we need to change that. We need to look at that. We need to make people aware about the contributions and educate people about the contributions of Africa and African people to the world history and civilization, not just Africa, but other parts of the world as well. We need to educate our youth. We need to educate Black and white youth about the contributions, our culture, our language, our civilization, and also look at the way we portray Africa and Africans and people who are not Europeans, and look at how we can address that in our media. So all the people who have power, control over the media need to be addressed in the way that they look at these things. We also need to push that institutions that made promises about the Black Lives Matter, that they fulfill their promises by committing resources to these promises that they've made, these initiatives that they've made. And the other thing that I picked up yesterday from yesterday's session was that a lot of Black workers are facing a lot of racism, institutional racism in the workplace. And so we as unions need to work really hard to ensure that
30 seconds.
Met. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Juliana. Just got some announcements to end at the end for this session. Show Racism the Red Card's annual Wear Red Day will be taking place on the 22nd of October, 2021. And the details at theredcard.org. On the 19th of March 2022, we'll see events and actions around the world for UN Anti-Racism Day to help build actions in Britain. Please join and share the Facebook event posted in chat. And our campaigning work is only possible because of your support. Please consider donating by clicking the Join or Donate tab on our website. In January, we'll organise a national event marking Holocaust Memorial Day to unite against anti-Semitism and fascism, and say loudly and clearly, never again. And to find your local Stand Up to Racism group, visit standuptoracism.org.uk and check the list on the left of the page. And at 5 p.m, join Diane Abbott, Gary Young, and a host of leading anti-racists for our closing rally. Join on YouTube, Facebook, or Zoom webinar, and check your email or our Twitter for details. Thank you very much. That was a really informative and inspiring meeting, and let's hope that we're going to see a very serious and powerful campaign around the issue of reparations from here on in. Thank you.